حبوبي بالوصال أنعم علي وجد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق والحق والهادي إلى صراط المستقيم. صلى الله وسلم عليه وعلى آله حق قدر ومقدار العظيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. رب أدخلني مدخل صدق وأخرجني مخرج صدق واجعلني من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. As it's been said many times, there's many paths to Allah. We're in a sense, we're following a particular path with particular principles and scholars, and that's not the only way, you know. And there should never be cliquey. It should never be like this is we're on it and no one else is on it. You know, that's really really important. And I just realize how privileged we are to be in this space, to hear these things, to be in the company of the Shaykh, and how many millions of Muslims will never ever hear some of these things that you're hearing. And that shouldn't put us in a place of arrogance or a place of, but right, the opposite. It should put it in a place of humility, that alhamdulillah, Allah has chosen us to, not because we're better than anyone or because it's just huge tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to even know the name of some of these people, and know the name of Imam al-Ghazali, or know the name of Imam al-Haddad or Hamid Muhammad. Many Muslims will live their whole lives never knowing that, and never even having the desire to really. MashaAllah, they do the fara'id, they do everything, you know, but they never have, as Imam Ghazali, Imam Haddad himself says, that someone will live their whole life, they'll never have that desire. You know, why would anyone go to millions of Muslims say, why do you go to retreat? You know, I've never heard of that before. You know, I think we have to, when you're in it, it's hard to see what's out there. You know, the majority, the millions of people who never even think of that, you know, let alone experience it. So it's really important to remember that. But we are also nawab, we're also representatives. We try and take some of that back and make it as easy and accessible as possible. Not this is my little secret thing that I have. And in a sense, it is. We don't. And that's one of the principles of our shaykh, is we don't talk about how great my shaykh is and how wonderful this is. But you just emanate that to the other people without saying names, without using complicated language. You just give it to people, because the majority, that's what people need. But don't put them off with the kind of trappings or the names, and etc. So what I wanted to do in this session is to we've talked a lot about Imam Ghazali and the Kitab al-Ilm, this massive, this incredible work that he did, but he also had some other works which are perhaps a little bit more accessible. And one of the beautiful things our Shaykh have been doing is making them accessible to us. It's not easy to read Kitab al-Ilm of Imam Ghazali, even in English, especially in English actually. English, in fact, the English is probably harder than the Arabic, isn't it? He's out of the beauty of Deen, the Prophet ﷺ himself. There's different levels, even in terms of practice, in terms of adhkar, du'a, Quran. There's a high level, there's a middle level, and there's always the basic level for the average Joe, even the illiterate person. If you can't read the whole Quran, read Surah Al-Ikhlas 3 times. And the whole of Tawheed is in that. If even the illiterate peasant in Bangladesh or wherever it is can understand the reality of Tawheed in those 4 verses of the Quran. They don't even have to go to learn all the stuff that other people need to learn. You see, and the same with the shuyukh, the ulama. They have the higher books. And they have the medium level books, and they have the beginner books. Yeah. So what Imam Ghazali did was did he write Bidayat al-Hidayah as he was doing the Ihya? It must have been in that same period. Post. Same or post. So when he comes back, you've heard this. I'm sure you're familiar with the story now. He comes back to this world and starts to disseminate all these amazing things that he's good. And the master work is the Ihya, but he also realized that there's people who are yet to come who are going to start their path to knowledge. And he wrote Bidayat al-Hidayah, beginning of guidance for them. And probably lots of you, maybe many of you have already come across this work. Some people, this will be just a bit of a revision. And then he wrote another work right at the end of his life called Minhaj al-Abidin, which is a compact, a compact kind of. Basically this is the path to Allah in kind of 7 stages, you could say. And they all complement each other. They don't all contain exactly the same thing. But I wanted to just bring a few things from Bidayat al-Hidayah and then bring a few things from Minhaj al-Abidin, all on the topic of knowledge, to perhaps fill in something. A lot of it will be reiterating what's already been said, inshallah. So he wrote Bidayat al-Hidayah as a beginner, for the beginner who's on the path of ilm, path of knowledge. And all of us, inshallah, I'm myself a beginner. And when we first went to Tareem, you start reading the basic books of fiqh and stuff like that. But on the other side, this is the first book that we studied. So Shaykh Ibrahim, he facilitated that to happen. And that's how the ideal beginning of knowledge is to have that balance, you know. And I'm sure, and I'm not sure how many places of knowledge really have that you go straight into the books. But is there accompanied with that? Is there something in the spiritual suluk which is balancing that out? That is really important. So I don't know if you go to Pakistan, if you go to Medina University, whatever. Is there something alongside all the other stuff you're learning which is balancing it out? Because if it isn't, then there's a danger. And that's what Imam Ghazali does immediately in the beginning of the book. And he's writing it like as a nasiha, as an advice for a younger student, as a younger brother. He also has another book called Ayyuha al-Walad. You know, he writes to as a father to a son. So this idea of let me just if you're going to set out and embark on this path, then let me just tell you a few things before you start. And literally, he doesn't mince his words. He's just like immediately from the get-go, he's like, if your intention is wrong, then you're lost. From literally within the first paragraph, he said that. If you haven't set your intention, and that's really what hit me yesterday. Just coming into we came in at 5 o'clock, the adhkar, dua, and then the first thing was on intention, and it just made me think, what we have to just. It's not. You know, however much you've read, however much you've learned, you always have to come back to this thing. You're never done with this. You know, I've done this. That's the basic stuff. I'm on to the next. This is. You know, for me that was a real powerful reminder of just how far have we got with our intention. So he says, I'm going to read it all, but everyone should read this if you haven't read it already. And if you read it already, read it again. And that's the beauty of these things. Our teachers keep on going over and over again. It's not just the big books, even the quote-unquote small books. And this is not a small book, with the beginning of guidance. Yeah. Who's actually read it or covered it, or anyone here? Okay, quite a few people, yeah. If you haven't, it's good to do it with a teacher, but even just reading it, even just reading that introduction is powerful enough. But he basically says that if your intention is to compete, show off, outdo your peers, garner attention, amass worldly things, then you're on your way to destroying your religion, basically. So it's heavy. It's heavy, as a lot of these discussions are. What else? We could just read it all, but I wanted just to pick out a few things. But then he says, you know, if seeking knowledge, your intention and aim between Allah and Most High and yourself is to gain guidance, hudan, yani, goodness, and not simply the transmission of information. You see, hidayah dun riwayah. You know, anyone can memorize and internalize what so and so said this and he said that, and you know, and a lot of the internet kind of stuff, the YouTube stuff is he said this and a reaction. You have the whole idea of having a reaction video. You know, someone said this and I'm going to react to this and I'm going to pick this apart. And it's like, is that knowledge? Is that knowledge, or is it just? I don't know what it is, to be honest. Where's the hudan? Where's the guidance in that? Where's the benefit in that? But if you're doing it for the sake of sincerely wanting guidance, you know, sincerely wanting goodness, sincerely want to get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then good tidings to you. The angels will spread their wings for you, and the fish in the sea will pray for you, and all the things that I mentioned about ilm will be for you. So you see the difference. You're either on the path of destroying yourself and harming others, or you're on the path of light and guidance and so on. And he carries on. He says, I'm going to point to the beginning of guidance. I'm going to offer you this system, this program, this manhaj. If you like, if you find yourself, see how you react to it. If you react in a good way to it, then that's a good sign. If you don't like the sound of it, then it's probably not too good for you, basically. You know, if you don't like the sound of this, what I'm going to put you through, this kind of litmus test, if you don't like it, then It's a sign that maybe your intention wasn't right. This is so it's actually a mercy, because he's before you go any further, let me just clarify things to you so you don't waste any time and you don't harm yourself, basically. And then I wanted to jump to another important point where and then basically the first half of the book is just how you structure your day, basically. How you structure and a lot of it is awrad. He gives a huge amount of time to awrad and adhkar and dua and stuff like that, which is just in and of itself is telling us, how important these things are. And why are we doing all these things? Why are we spending so long doing these different adhkar and this? It's a tried and tested method. It's not the only one, but that's the one that we've taken from our teachers. If you go somewhere else, they might have a different way of doing things, but this is the way that we've taken from our teachers. So he basically lays out the day. What do you do? How you get up? How you do your wudu? How you do your ghusl? How you do this? How you walk to the mosque? All these adab, etiquettes. He goes through all that, and then he comes to a point where he talks about. Then he says, now it's the time to engage in beneficial knowledge, ilm al-nafi'. And this is essence what the Kitab al-Ilm is telling us. What is the definition of beneficial knowledge? Why does the Prophet ﷺ seek refuge from knowledge which doesn't benefit? A'udhu billah. A'udhu billah. When you say a'udhu billah, you're usually seeking refuge from something which is terrible. A'udhu billah min ilmin la yanfa'. The Prophet is seeking refuge from Allah. Please take me away from this ilmun la yanfa', as knowledge which doesn't benefit. That's a pretty strong statement. A'udhu billah min la yanfa'. But what is this ilm al-nafi'? Does anyone? He mentions about 5 or 6 things. Can anyone? What does Imam al-Ghazali define as what is beneficial knowledge? The people who have read the book before, or even if you haven't read the book before, what do you think he would classify as beneficial knowledge? Anyone? Even from what it's already been kind of touched on in the previous sessions, but. Legal knowledge, yeah. But in what does, in and of itself, that legal knowledge, it's more like what does that lead to, basically? Anyone? What would we describe as beneficial knowledge? Yeah.
It's quite broad, but knowledge that keeps you in the remembrance of Allah.
Knowledge that keeps you in the remembrance of Allah. Yeah. Close to what he said, yeah.
Shaykh, you also mentioned a few points yesterday around knowledge pertaining to certain tasks or activities that communities need to survive. So you might need a doctor, or you might need people to carry out certain household activities.
Yeah. But that's coming. I mean, that's definitely there. But that's almost like once you've got going more to the kind of essential knowledge that we need. Was it going to say something? Yeah.
Refinement of character.
Refinement of character, definitely. Anyone else? Ladies? So, yeah. Huh? Knowledge of Allah. Knowledge of Allah. Yeah, knowledge of who Allah is. When we said that the Quran, he says, what is the Quran except Allah, yu'arrif nafsahu. He's telling us who He is. Anything else? The akhirah, yes. Anyone? Any more? He basically, he's about 5 or 6 things. So he says, useful knowledge or beneficial knowledge is only that which increases your fear of Allah Most High. And fear, again, is that the right translation? But you could say, fearful awareness of Allah, awareness of Allah's greatness. Useful knowledge is only that which increases your fear of Allah Most High. Number 1. Okay, so that comes into knowledge of who Allah is. You say, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. Only the knowers truly fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 1. Number 2, increases your insight into your own defects. Increases your insight into your own defects. Okay, your own character faults and issues that you have to work on. 3rd is the practical one that he's kind of touched on. Your legal knowledge, essentially, your knowledge of how to worship Allah Most Mighty. Okay, that could be legal, but it could be that the legal is the first step to that. But then, how to worship Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. As-sirat al-mustaqim has an outward, necessity. We have to know the outward rules of that, but what's the inner reality of that as well. It reduces your yearning for this world. Okay, it reduces the true knowledge. Takes you away from the dunya. Okay, it takes away your love of the dunya. It takes away attachment with the dunya. That's a sign of true knowledge. Okay, you come from. If you're sitting in a gathering like this and you come out, has it increased you or decreased your? Has it increased or decreased your worldly attachments and worldly connections? Yeah. And then the opposite, increases your yearning for the hereafter. It decreases your love of dunya, increases your yearning for hereafter. And opens your eyes to the things that spoil your worship, so you may guard against them. Okay, it's similar to the first one. It gives that insight into what will ruin your worship. And then finally, it lays bare to you the scheming of Satan, shaitan, the deceit, etc., etc. So in those 5 or 6 things, we have the 3 main enemies, that the people of the inner path talk about, the people of the path talk about, which are, what are the 3 main things, the 3 main obstacles or enemies that we have? Shaitan, hawa, dunya. Shaitan, nafs and dunya. Hawa and nafs, I mean, you can make separation, but essentially everyone agrees on the 3, like shaitan, nafs and dunya. They're all there in those 5 things. Okay? So any knowledge which, if any knowledge that there's no mention of any of these things, then there's something missing. There's no awareness of these 3 enemies, then how beneficial is it? Okay. As a starting point, of course, we're not saying the latest, the further levels of knowledge when you're going into more, but just as a foundational point. Okay, what increases you in that fearful awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It increases your insight into your own defects. Increases your knowledge of how to worship Allah. Reduces your yearning for this world and increases your yearning for the hereafter. And opens your eyes to the things that spoil your worship and the schemings of the shaitan. So he's putting that there in the first book. Okay, we'll go into in the book Kitab al-Ilm, we'll go into more detail, but here it isn't so it's good to have these things at the top of our minds, at the top of our attention. So I'm just going to move on to just a few things from the other book, which is Minhaj al-Abidin, on knowledge. So for those who just joined us, we're just filling in a few things. As Imam Ghazali, he had a beginning book and he had a middle book. Although Minhaj al-Abidin isn't really, it's a very high book as well. It's much shorter than, you could read it in much less time than the Ihya, but it's a very deep book as well, as they all are, of course. But he made it as more accessible. A lot of the things in the Ihya are kind of summarized in the Minhaj al-Abidin. So he has 7 challenges or 7 obstacles in this book. He talks about the 7 obstacles you have to go through. You have to surmount to get to Allah, on the path. He's called Minhaj al-Abidin, the path of those who want to worship Allah. If you want to take the path of worship, you have to overcome these 7 obstacles. Okay, and the first obstacle is the obstacle of knowledge. You can't worship Allah without knowledge. And the next one is tawbah. And then he goes on to the challenges that we just talked about, dunya and nafs and shaitan, and so on and so on. If I go through them all, it'll take too much long. But just starting with the ilm, he says ilm is the first barrier, the first obstacle on this. And he always, as with the Ihya, he's always trying to convince the kind of, he's like, were you to say this, and I'll tell you this. He's always, if you doubt what I'm saying, then let me convince you. He's always in this kind of, he's always trying to make us, he's always putting an argument to convince us that what he's saying is you can disagree with me, but let me just put my case across. Why am I making this? So he's always proving his point. And the point that he makes is that he says everything was created for 2 things. Everything was created for 2 things. For knowledge and for worship. Everything was created for ilm and for ibadah. Everything was created. And he uses 2 verses to prove that point. I'm sure we all know one of the verses. What's the proof that everything was created for ibadah? What's that? We only created jinn and man to worship me or to come to know me. We could also say to know me. But the other verse is more not so well known, in which he says that Allah الذي خلق سبع سماوات ومن الأرض مثلهن. Allah, it is God who created 7 heavens and a similar number of earths. ليتنزل الأمر بينهن لتعلموا أن الله على كل شيء قدير وأن الله قد أحاط بكل شيء علما. That His command descends through them. Allah's decree, Allah's command descends through the heavens and the earth in order that you come to know. لتعلموا. Okay. In other words, everything has been, all these realms and worlds have been created in order that what? You come to know that Allah has power over all things and Allah has, and His knowledge encompasses everything. Yeah. Everything is, في كل شيء آية تدل أنه الواحد. Everything is pointing to His existence. Everything is pointing that you come to know Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just think about that for a moment. Everything is there pointing to that we come to know Him. So if you live your whole life not realizing that, you've missed the whole point of everything that's been created. So that's the point that he's making, that everything was created for the sake of coming to know, to attain knowledge. And then he has this sort of, which is superior, knowledge or worship, which is more important. He kind of discusses this, but he makes the point that there can be no worship without knowledge. Okay, and knowledge is the tree, and worship is the fruit. Okay, knowledge is the tree, worship is the fruit. The honor belongs to the tree. The tree is the essence. But what use is a tree without fruit? That knowledge then doesn't lead you to take the path to come to try to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then it's not serving its purpose. That's the kind of point that he's making. And you can't worship Allah worship will not be valid without knowledge. You need to know what invalidates your worship, and what are the obligations, what are the prohibitions. And we remind ourselves of the famous hadith Qudsi, which tells us of the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's something we should have up, we should be constantly remind ourselves of it. And it should be in the khutbah, it should be in, it's not just some kind of sort of Sufi talk, because this is a hadith Qudsi and Allah is speaking, it's in Sahih Bukhari, which Allah says, He says, "Man adili waliyan faqad adantu bil harb." The one who takes my wali as an enemy, I have declared war on him. Yeah. That's how it begins. It's like you're kind of shaking, and then he tells us how the path to become a wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the wali of Allah, again, this is not a discussion for the Sufi circles. This is a discussion. This is Sahih Bukhari. Okay, this is Allah speaking on the tongue of His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. ما تقرب إلي عبدي بشيء أحب إلي بما افترضت عليه. My servant draws close to me with nothing more beloved to me than that what I have made obligatory upon him or her. My servant draws close to me with nothing more beloved to me than that which I have made obligatory upon him or her. Okay. So it all begins with the fara'id. What is obligatory upon us? That of course requires knowledge. The knowledge of the fara'id and also the prohibitions. Okay. So that's the foundation of getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وما زال عبدي يتقرب إلي بالنوافل حتى أحبه. But only after that foundation has been established, then my servant draws closer to me with the extra worship, with going further, spending more time, all the things we've been talking about, reflection and worship and dhikr, and حتى أحبه, until I love him or her. But you see the path. It's just been set out for you. This is the path. Establish the fara'id, which you cannot do without knowledge. Then do the extra stuff, but even that still requires knowledge. We don't give priority to one thing over the other when something else is more important. Yeah. And you could say, why are we sitting in this retreat when it's just terrible stuff happening. We're not doing anything to change it. But this is the essence. What we're building here is the essence to rectifying the ummah, establishing these foundations. And it doesn't neglect the rights of the ummah. And then amazing things happen when that person becomes beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which are beyond description. What language cannot explain the state of that person who's beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How can someone be? فَإِذَا أَحْبَبْتُهُ كُنْتُ سَمْعُ الَّذِي يَسْمَعُ بِهِ. I become the hearing with which he hears. وَبَصَّرُ الَّذِي يَبْصُرُ بِهِ. وَيَدُ الَّتِي يَبْتِشُ بِهَا. وَرِجْلُهُ لَيَمْشِي بِهِ. And I become I just take over that person. What does that mean? And it tells us our deen is not a deen of we're not literalists, because if you're going to take it literally, you're going to be in big problems trying to explain this hadith. How can Allah be the hearing of a person in the sight? It's just, we have to try and use our imagination, use metaphor, use language is there to give us an approximation of something that cannot really be described. Even the whole Quran is trying to describe the undescribable, isn't it? So in language, we're trying to describe something which is timeless and beyond subhanahu wa ta'ala. When he says, Inni qareeb, what does that mean? You don't really understand what that means. But it's an approximation. When Allah talks about the kursi and the arsh, and we can understand through metaphor that kings have palaces and kings have, but Allah is beyond that, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so on. And so on. What is it? لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. Ya Rabbi. And that's what I think Shaykh Yasser was saying as well. There's not just, in a sense, knowledge versus ibadah. They're in one sense they're separate, in one sense it's the same thing. That knowledge is ibadah. But the fruit is that knowledge. What does that lead to? What does it lead to? That's really the question. And the knowledge of Allah leads to the fear and awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Leads to that. Essentially adab. You can say the deen is all adab. The one, as they say, the one who has more adab is more of a Sufi than you. Man zada alayka fil adab zada alayka bit tasawwuf. If you have that person has more adab, they're more of a Sufi than even if they have nothing to do with any tariqah or any shaykh or anything. They just have more adab with you because they realize Allahu Akbar, and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam mu'adham, and everything is in its correct place. Why does Allah send a whole surah explaining this? Surah al-Hujurat. It's all about adab. O you who believe, don't raise your voices above the Prophet ﷺ, and so on and so on. The rights of brotherhood, the rights of don't call someone names, don't backbite, don't all these things. It's all there in that surah. Don't call yourself don't call yourself a believer until you truly have. Be careful of false claims. Yeah. Claiming something that you don't have without any proof. Yeah. تفضل.
Surah Al-Hujurat, you expand on Thabit radiallahu anhu, why did the surah come down for him at the time when his voice was loud and he was missing for a few days because he thought that the verse was directed to him?
That's part of it. But But also this idea of just realizing who the Prophet ﷺ is, basically. Realizing who the Prophet ﷺ is. And I think the more you know, the more you realize you don't know about Allah and about the Prophet ﷺ, the greatness of the Prophet ﷺ. And that's in the Quran itself. The Quran is telling us that. You can miss it. The thing about the Quran is you can read it and miss. It's very easy to miss some of the meanings that are in it. But that's how Allah speaks to the Prophet ﷺ, in verses like this and others. وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ فِيكُمْ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ فِيكُمْ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. Know that, be certain that in you is Rasulullah, or amongst you is Rasulullah ﷺ. But he mentions the balance. As Imam Hassan al-Basri says, seek knowledge in a way that doesn't detract from your worship, and worship in a way that doesn't detract from your learning. Having that balance. And I think that's what we love about art, the stuff that our shuyukh and our teachers is there's that real balance. I found that when I first I went to Syria, I studied Arabic, and you find these students doing like 16, 17 lectures a day in this mahad, amazing, real high level of knowledge, but there was no one was checking whether in terms of what their own suluk or their salah or anything. You could come, in a Western sense, you can come to a lecture and do everything and then go, and no one's not going to know if there's no checks and balances on whether someone's actually traveling, doing anything with that knowledge or acting. So it can be very dangerous. Whereas in Hadramaut, it's very much that balance of all the ilm is balanced out with the dhikr and that's what we need really. We don't need only if most of us, we won't study like huge, to a huge degree, but we need a lot of the balance of having the tazkiyah and the tasawwuf and the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's not an excuse also not to seek knowledge that we need. So this balance, idea of balance. Inshallah, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for complete and absolute sincerity, inshallah, in all that we do. Ya Rabbal Alameen, not because of us, but because of you, Ya Allah. Take the ana out and take the huwa, put the huwa in, inshallah. Take us out of it, Ya Rabb. Make it this is your affair, and this is your deen, and this is your Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We just want the honor of being part of that, inshallah, that we serve sincerely for your sake, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Whatever we're doing, Ya Rabb, whatever good that anyone and the Prophet ﷺ and us, we ask for that good, Ya Rabbi. I mean, and whatever evil he took refuge from, we seek refuge from, Ya Rabbi. And show us the truth, what it is, and allow us to follow it, and show us falsehood, what it is, and allow us to avoid it. Bless our children, our families, our communities, that we take from this light and this barakat and this blessing and this knowledge and take it back and we disseminate it, inshallah. Allah will relieve this gathering, inshallah, be a means of relief from the suffering of our brothers and sisters in so many places around the world, Ya Rabbi. Alameen. Ya Rabbi, Ya Rabbi, Ya Arhamar Rahimin, Ya Latif. يا أرحم الراحمين ما شاء الله سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم الحمد لله
وجد بالنوال منه إليّ